All right. So, you send over all this stuff on AI, and it's really a lot to unpack.
Yeah, it's a pretty big topic.
Oh, yeah. Articles, research, even just like your own notes.
Yeah, definitely tried to give you a good overview.
It is. It's a fascinating area.
Mm-hmm.
And what we're going to try and do today is sift through all of it and figure out, like, what are the essential things that we should really be paying attention to,
Absolutely, yeah. Cut through the noise a little bit.
Yeah. Because it can be kind of overwhelming, right? When you start digging into AI, there's just so much there.
Absolutely. I mean, it feels like it touches everything these days,
It really does. And the big question that seems to run through all of your materials is this like a threat?
Yeah.
Or is this a huge opportunity?
Right. That's the core of it, I think.
Yeah. Is it a double-edged sword? Like, how do we even approach this?
Yeah, definitely a double-edged sword. And I think that's what makes it so fascinating to explore.
Yeah, definitely. Now, one thing that I noticed right away is your sources kind of point out that there are different levels of AI. So before we even dive into like the impact, we should probably make sure we're all on the same page about what we even mean when we say AI.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I've got this thing called narrow AI, sometimes called weak AI.
Right.
Which is, I think of like Siri as a good example.
It's a perfect example.
It can do specific things really, really well.
Yeah.
But it's not going to take over the world.
Right, exactly. It's very specialized.
Yeah, exactly. And then you've got this sort of more theoretical, at this point, general AI or strong AI. Mm-hmm. And this is, I guess, what a lot of the conversation is about, because this is the one that would have like human level cognitive abilities.
Right, exactly. And I think that cognitive word is really important here.
Okay, so let's define that. What do we mean when we say cognitive?
So when we talk about cognitive with AI, we're basically talking about processes like thinking, learning, problem solving, reasoning, understanding language,
all the stuff we do as humans.
Yeah, exactly.
That we consider we think of as intelligence.
Exactly. It's about replicating those kinds of very human mental processes in machines.
Okay, so that sets the stage a little bit. And one thing that your materials really highlight is that if you're going to dive into this world of AI, you really got to have a grasp of some key vocabulary terms.
Absolutely, yeah. It's kind of the foundation, right?
Yeah, it is. It's like you're not going to be able to build a house if you don't know what a hammer is.
Exactly.
So let's just go through some of these terms. So the first one that jumps out is disruption.
Okay.
And I think we hear this word a lot, but in the context of AI, it seems to have a very particular meaning.
Right. And it's not just like a little interruption or something.
No, it's a big deal.
It's a major change, that kind of shakes things up. The example they use is like job sectors. The potential for AI to completely transform how we work.
Right.
And that's a pretty huge disruption.
Yeah. Okay, so that's a good one to start with. And then we've got this word exponential.
Right.
Which again, we hear all the time, especially when we talk about technology.
Right.
But what does it actually mean? What's the core concept?
Yeah. So basically, exponential growth, it means things aren't just increasing at a steady rate.
Okay.
They're increasing faster and faster.
Oh, wait. So it's not just like a straight line up.
Right. It's more like a curve that keeps getting steeper.
Okay, so it's accelerating.
Exactly. Accelerating. And that's how they talk about AI capabilities.
Got it. And that makes sense when you think about all the advancements that seem to be happening so quickly.
Yeah. Like it's not just a slow and steady progress. It's really speeding up.
Right. Okay, so another big one is automation.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, this is something we see all around us in different forms.
Yeah, for sure.
But when we talk about automation in the context of AI, what are we really getting at?
So it's really about using machines or systems to do tasks that humans used to do.
Right.
Like, the classic example is manufacturing.
Right.
But it goes way beyond that now.
Yeah. And it's that minimal human input part that's really key.
Yeah, exactly. The idea is that these systems can do things on their own without us needing to constantly supervise them.
Right. Okay. Surveillance is another term that comes up a lot. And I think this one's really interesting because it has these like kind of, ominous connotations.
It does, yeah. Makes you think of Big Brother and all that.
It does. It does. So how do we define surveillance in the world of AI?
It's basically about using technology to monitor people.
Okay.
For security purposes or to track what they're doing.
And this is where AI gets really powerful, right?
Yeah.
Because it can process so much information so quickly.
Absolutely. Like, think about facial recognition technology. Yeah. That's powered by AI. And it can be used for good, but there are also a lot of concerns about privacy.
Right. So it's a really powerful tool with a lot of implications.
Definitely.
That you need to be thinking about carefully.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. And then one last one that I think is worth highlighting is augment.
Okay.
Because this one seems to offer a more positive perspective on AI.
Yeah, this is about how AI can actually help us, make us better.
Right. So what does it mean to augment something in this context?
It's about enhancing or improving something.
Okay.
So in the case of AI, it's the idea that AI can boost our own abilities.
So not necessarily replace us, but make us like superpowered humans.
Exactly. Like, think about AI-powered tools that can help us analyze data faster.
Oh, yeah.
Or make better decisions. That's augmenting our capabilities.
Okay, so that's a really important distinction, I think, to keep in mind.
Absolutely. It's not always about AI taking over.
Right. Okay, so now that we've got some of the key terms down, let's dive into the meat of the matter.
Yeah, for sure.
Let's talk about the potential downsides, the threats of AI that your sources kind of highlight. And the one that everyone always brings up first is job displacement.
Right. Yeah, that's a big one.
It's a huge one. And it's understandable, right?
Oh, yeah.
Because if AI can automate tasks that humans currently do, what happens to those people?
Right. And I think the fear is that it's not just like factory jobs anymore,
Right.
It's potentially white collar jobs too. Like, they even talk about lawyers and financial analysts.
Oh, yeah.
So it's a much wider range of jobs that could potentially be impacted.
And it's not just about the jobs themselves, right? It's about the whole structure of our economy, our society.
Absolutely.
What happens if large segments of the population are suddenly unable to work?
It raises some really fundamental questions about how we organize our society, how we distribute wealth.
Right. So it's a huge concern. And then another one that's closely tied to that is the loss of privacy.
Yeah. And this is where AI gets a little scary,
It does.
Yeah.
How does AI kind of feed into these concerns about privacy?
Well, think about the ability to track and analyze data.
Okay.
AI can do that on a scale we've never seen before.
Right.
So it's like every move we make, every click we make online could potentially be tracked and analyzed. And that's a little unnerving for a lot of people.
It is. And then you have these very specific technologies like facial recognition.
Right, exactly.
Which, it's hard to even know what to make of that, right? Because
it's hard, It's like it has its uses, but it also has the potential for abuse.
Right. It feels like it's straight out of a science fiction movie.
It does. But it's becoming more and more real.
Right. And then another area that your sources really go into is this idea of autonomous weapons. And I have to admit, this one really kind of chills me.
Yeah, it's a scary thought.
It is. It's like, what happens when we have machines making life or death decisions?
And machines that can, potentially act without any human intervention.
Right. It just seems like a recipe for disaster.
Yeah. Some people have called it a ticking time bomb.
Wow.
Yeah. Because it's not just about the weapons themselves, it's about the potential for things to go wrong.
Right. Like, what happens if the AI makes a mistake? Or what if it gets hacked?
Exactly. It raises a lot of questions that we don't really have answers to yet.
Right. So it's definitely a big concern. And then I guess kind of on a more individual level, there's this idea of over-dependence on AI.
Right.
And I think this is something that maybe we don't talk about as much.
Yeah.
But it's still really important, right?
It is, because if we become too reliant on AI to do everything for us, what happens to our own skills and ability?
Right. Like, if we're constantly relying on AI to make decisions for us, do we even know how to think for ourselves anymore?
Exactly. It's like, if you always use GPS, you might forget how to read a map.
Right. So it's a very real concern. Okay, so those are some of the potential downsides, the threats. But now let's flip the coin. Let's look at the other side. The opportunities that AI presents. And one area that always gets a lot of attention is healthcare.
Yeah, healthcare is a big one.
It is. And for good reason.
Yeah, the potential there is huge. Yeah.
So how is AI poised to kind of revolutionize healthcare?
Well, think about things like faster and more accurate diagnosis.
Okay.
Using AI to analyze medical images or patient data.
Right. And they talk about personalized medicine in your sources, right?
Yes.
Like tailoring treatments to specific individuals.
Exactly. And, they even talk about robot-assisted surgeries.
Oh, wow.
Where the AI can help the surgeon be more precise and do things that would be impossible for a human hand.
Right. So it really seems like the possibilities are almost endless.
Yeah, it's a really exciting area.
It is. And then another really interesting one is this idea of education for all.
Yeah, that's a powerful concept.
It is. And it seems like AI could really play a key role in making that a reality.
Right. I mean, think about AI tutors.
Okay.
That can provide personalized instruction to each student.
Right.
And it can adapt to their learning style, their pace.
And that could be huge, right?
Huge, yeah. Because it means that everyone could have access to high-quality education.
Right, regardless of where they live or their background.
Exactly. So it could really level the playing field.
Okay, so that's a really powerful potential benefit. Climate change is another big one, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And AI can be a real game changer here, too.
Okay, how so?
Well, think about analyzing climate data to make better predictions, or optimizing energy consumption.
Okay, yeah.
Or even developing new sustainable technologies.
So using AI to actually find solutions to the climate crisis.
Exactly. And we really need all the help we can get on that front.
We do. And then, of course, there's the business world, which seems to be embracing AI in a big way.
Oh, yeah. They see it as a way to boost productivity and efficiency.
Right. So how are businesses using AI to kind of improve their operations?
Well, it's a lot of things, automating tasks, streamlining workflows, improving customer service.
Okay.
And then I think a really big one is using AI to analyze data.
Yeah.
To gain insights that would be impossible for humans to see.
Right. So making better decisions based on data.
Exactly. And that can be a real competitive advantage.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's important to note, we talked about job displacement.
Right.
But your sources also point out that AI could actually create new jobs.
Yeah, that's right. It's not just about jobs disappearing.
Right. So what kinds of jobs might we see emerging as AI becomes more prevalent?
Well, you're going to need people to develop and train AI systems.
Okay.
So like AI trainers, and then there's this whole area of AI ethics. Because you're going to need people who can think about the ethical implications of AI.
Right. So those are some really interesting new job possibilities.
Yeah, and it's probably just the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, we probably can't even imagine all the jobs that might exist in 10 or 20 years.
Exactly. It's a rapidly evolving field.
It is. So it's clear that AI is already having a real-world impact.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's not just some theoretical concept anymore. And your sources actually have a whole table of real-world applications of AI.
Yeah, it's pretty impressive.
It is. So let's just touch on a few of those just to kind of give people a sense of what's already happening.
Okay.
So in healthcare, they talk about IBM Watson.
Right.
What is that exactly?
So it's an AI platform that can analyze massive amounts of medical data. Okay. Like research papers, patient records, you name it.
Okay.
And it can use that to help doctors diagnose diseases and make treatment decisions.
So it's like a superpowered medical assistant.
Yeah, kind of. It can do things that would take humans a really long time to do.
Wow, that's amazing. And in finance, we're seeing these things called robo-advisors. What are those all about?
So they're basically automated financial advisors.
Okay.
They use AI to create investment portfolios and give financial advice.
So it's like having a personal financial advisor, but without the human element.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a lot more affordable for a lot of people.
Right. And then transportation, self-driving cars.
Yeah, that's what everyone thinks about.
It is. And it seems like Tesla's really kind of leading the charge there.
They are, yeah.
But how does AI actually play into self-driving cars?
It's pretty much everything.
Really?
Yeah. Like the car uses AI to see its surroundings, to make decisions about steering and braking, to navigate, to avoid obstacles. It's all AI.
Okay, so it's not just like one little part of the car.
No, it's the brains of the operation.
Right. That's amazing. And then, even in entertainment, we're seeing AI at work.
Yeah, for sure.
Like Netflix uses AI to recommend movies and shows. How does that work exactly?
They analyze your viewing history, what you've watched, what you've liked, what you've skipped.
Okay.
And they use that to predict what you might want to watch next.
So it's getting to know you better than you know yourself, almost.
Almost, yeah. And it's pretty effective.
It is. And then I guess on a more everyday level, we're seeing more and more chatbots popping up.
Yeah. Definitely.
Like on websites and stuff.
Yeah.
How are those using AI?
So they use a type of AI called natural language processing to understand what you're saying and respond in a way that sounds human.
So they're not just spitting out pre-programmed responses.
Right. They're actually trying to have a conversation with you.
Wow, that's pretty cool. And it's interesting too because your sources also talk about some of the language that we use around AI.
Yeah, the expressions and idioms.
Yeah. So push the envelope, for example. What does that mean in the context of AI?
It's about going beyond the limits.
Okay.
Just constantly trying to make AI more powerful and do new things.
So it's like pushing the boundaries of what's possible.
Exactly.
Okay, and then you have at the cutting edge, which they use to describe some of the research that's being done.
Right. So that's about being at the forefront of innovation.
Okay.
Like the companies and researchers who are doing the most advanced work.
Right. And then this one's kind of funny. Out of the loop.
Oh, yeah, I like that one.
Yeah, it's like, I think we've all felt that way at some point with technology.
Yeah, for sure.
So what does it mean to be out of the loop when it comes to AI?
It's about not being aware of the latest developments.
Okay.
Like falling behind.
Right. And then I guess one of the most common ones is game changer, which we hear all the time.
We do.
But how does that apply to AI specifically?
It's about how AI has the potential to radically transform things.
Okay.
Like in healthcare, in education, in pretty much every industry.
Right. It's not just making small improvements.
No, it's about completely changing the game.
Okay, yeah. So those are some good, linguistic tools for talking about AI. Now, your sources also have some really interesting discussion questions.
Oh, yeah, they're thought-provoking.
They are. And I think these are really important for everyone to kind of grapple with.
Absolutely.
So one of the big ones is, will AI ultimately create more jobs than it destroys?
Right. That's the million-dollar question.
It is. And what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's too early to say for sure.
Yeah.
It's a really complex issue.
Right.
But I do think it's important to remember that technology has always created new jobs.
Right.
Even as it's automated old ones.
Okay, yeah. So it's not necessarily a zero-sum game.
No, not at all.
Right.
I think the key is going to be adaptability.
Okay.
How quickly can people learn new skills and adjust to the changing job market?
Right. So that's a really important point. And then another really interesting question they raise is this idea of global AI regulations. Should there be international rules for how AI is developed and used?
That's a tough one, right?
Yeah, it is. It is because, who gets to decide what those rules are?
Right, exactly. And how do you enforce them across different countries with different values and priorities?
Right. So it's a really complex issue.
It is, but it's one we need to be thinking about.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, on a more personal level, I think it's interesting that your sources encourage us to think about our own use of AI. Because I think a lot of times we don't even realize how much AI is already in our lives.
Right. It's kind of become invisible.
It has. Think about the algorithms that are constantly feeding us information on social media.
Oh, yeah.
Or the way that our phones are constantly predicting what we're going to do next.
It's kind of amazing when you think about it.
It is. And then, thinking even bigger picture.
Yeah.
Which industries are likely to be most affected by AI in the coming years?
Well, we've already talked about some of them, like healthcare.
Right.
And transportation. But I think finance is another one that's going to see a lot of change.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And education.
Yeah. I think those are all areas where AI has the potential to completely disrupt things.
Right. So it's going to be really interesting to see how those industries evolve in the coming years.
Absolutely.
Okay. So, we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have.
And I think your sources do a really good job of kind of summarizing the key takeaways.
Yeah, they do.
So AI is clearly a very powerful force that's transforming our world. It has the potential to be both good and bad.
Right.
And it's really important for us to understand the language that's being used to talk about AI and to engage in critical thinking about its implications.
I think that's the most important takeaway.
Yeah.
It is. And I think your sources also do a good job of just kind of injecting a little bit of fun into it.
Yeah, they do.
They have some fun AI facts. So did you know that the term artificial intelligence was actually coined back in 1956?
It's amazing how long it's been around, right?
It is. And I think we often forget that.
Yeah.
This isn't just some newfangled thing.
No, it's been brewing for a long time.
Yeah. And another interesting one, back in 2016, There's this AI program called AlphaGo.
Right.
And it beat the world champion in the game of Go.
Yeah, that was a huge milestone.
It was. And Go is like notoriously complex.
Oh yeah, way more complex than chess.
So that was a really big deal. And then I think, on a more everyday level, we have to remember that AI is powering things like recommendations on Spotify and YouTube.
Right. It's learning our tastes.
It is. And it's doing a pretty good job of it, I have to say.
Yeah, it's gotten really sophisticated.
It has. So I guess, the big question that we started with, is AI a threat or an opportunity?
Right.
Having gone through all of this, what's your take?
Well, I think it's both, really.
Okay.
It's a powerful tool that can be used for good or for bad.
Right.
And it's really up to us, as a society, to decide how we want to use it.
Right. So it's not about the technology itself.
No.
It's about the choices that we make.
It's
about how we develop it, how we deploy it.
And how we regulate it.
Right. And for you, the listener, I think it's important to remember that this isn't just about understanding AI.
Right.
It's about developing critical thinking skills that you can apply to any area of your life.
Absolutely. It's about being informed, being engaged.
Yeah. And just like being aware of the world around you.
Exactly. And being curious.
Yeah, definitely. So to leave you with one final thought.
Okay.
Your sources really emphasize that both language and technology are constantly evolving. And I think that's a really important point. Because it means that we're not just passive observers.
Right.
We're actually active participants.
Exactly.
In shaping the future.
And that's pretty exciting when you think about it.
It is. So the question is, how are you going to engage with this evolution? Not just as a user of technology.
Right.
But as someone who's helping to shape its development.
Yeah, I think that's a great question for everyone to consider.
It is. So thanks for joining us for this deep dive into AI.
My pleasure.
It's been a fascinating conversation.
It has.
And we hope you'll continue to explore this topic on your own.
Absolutely. Keep learning, keep asking questions.
Exactly. And until next time, keep those minds sharp. All right, so you're here because, like us, you really want to grasp what's going on. It's shaping our world. And today we're gonna take a deep dive into a topic that is both fascinating and so crucial right now. And that's the whole interplay between globalization and traditional cultures.
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge question.
Yeah.
Especially, as our world gets more and more connected. What's happening to those unique identities,
right?
The customs, the beliefs that have been passed down for generations.
Exactly. And to really get into this, we've been looking closely at
the future of traditional cultures in a globalized world.
Yeah, a great piece of writing, and it's not, sometimes these topics can feel a bit abstract, but this is really about.
It is about the real tangible ways that our world is evolving and the impact on diverse communities.
Exactly. So our mission today really is to kind of extract those core insights from this material and try to get to grips with how globalization is actually impacting these traditional cultures.
Yeah.
Both the challenges and perhaps surprisingly some of the opportunities that are emerging. Okay, so let's start right at the beginning. I think it's always helpful to make sure we're all on the same page.
Right.
Because when we say the word globalization, what are we really talking about?
Yeah, so the source we're looking at defines globalization as the process by which businesses or other organizations develop international influence or start operating on an international scale.
Okay.
So, at its core, it's really about this kind of increasing web of connections, right?
Yeah.
People, ideas, economies, all becoming much more intertwined right across the globe.
Right, that paints a picture.
Yeah.
And then on the other side, we have this idea of traditional cultures.
Right.
What does that encompass?
So traditional cultures, we could think about them as this rich and varied tapestry of customs, beliefs, and practices that are really unique to specific groups of people.
Okay.
It's their heritage, their distinct way of life, often passed down through families and communities over many, many generations. So
we've got this powerful force of globalization expanding and these very kind of deeply rooted and specific traditional cultures.
Yeah.
And the source makes this point that globalization can be a bit of a double-edged sword in this context.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, it presents itself both as a force that can unify and one that can potentially disrupt.
Yeah.
And, on the unifying side, as you mentioned, we see that increased interconnectedness.
Right.
The potential for economic growth as markets expand internationally.
Yeah.
And definitely, a greater exchange of ideas and perspectives between different cultures.
Yeah. Which, at first glance, that sounds like a really good thing.
Yeah.
Like more chances to learn from each other. But then we have this other side of the sword, this potential for disruption, even erosion.
Yeah, and that's where the source highlights the risk to traditional values and cultural practices, right?
Right.
So when cultures come into more frequent and more intense contact, especially when there's not an equal balance of influence,
Right.
the more dominant cultural forces can sometimes overshadow and weaken local traditions.
And the source gives a really concrete example of this. It says, the proliferation of Western media has significantly influenced youth culture in developing nations, sometimes at the expense of indigenous traditions.
Right.
And just to clarify, for anyone who's, proliferation in this context basically means that rapid increase and widespread availability.
Right.
Like how easy it is to access, American movies or music.
Anywhere now.
Yeah, almost anywhere.
Precisely.
Right.
And the anecdote that's shared about young people in parts of Africa being more familiar with American pop culture icons than they are with their own local folklore,
It's powerful.
That brings the point home.
It's a really stark illustration of what we mean by this idea of cultural displacement, where those familiar cultural references are shifting away from that local heritage towards more globally dominant forms of expression.
Right.
And it really makes you stop and think, have you observed, you the listener, have you observed any similar examples in your own life or in your own community?
Yeah, in your own neighborhood.
Have you noticed this kind of influence?
Yeah.
Closer to home now, this idea of one culture becoming so dominant that it overshadows others leads us to a key concept, and that's homogenization. So what exactly do we mean by that?
Yeah, so homogenization, as the source explains, is the process of making things uniform or similar.
Okay.
So the concern here is that globalization, with its powerful channels for the flow of media, consumer goods, even language, can lead to this cultural homogenization, right? The fear is that we gradually lose this incredible diversity of human cultures, and we start to see a more uniform. And often that tends to be a Western-influenced global culture emerging.
Right.
It's like if you imagine a vibrant and varied garden, slowly starting to have more and more of the same types of flowers.
That's a really good way to picture it.
Yeah.
And it's a bit of a scary thought, a world where that local distinctiveness starts to fade.
Right.
But then the source offers this really fascinating counterpoint with the example of Japan.
Right.
So what makes their experience so noteworthy?
Yeah. So Japan is presented as this really compelling case study, a nation that has very successfully embraced modernity, global markets. But they've managed at the same time to maintain a very distinct cultural heritage.
Right.
So, consider this. Japan is a leader in technological innovation.
Yeah.
They have, numerous globally recognized brands. Yet traditions like the tea ceremony continue to hold real significance.
Right.
Traditional arts flourish.
Yeah.
And they've even successfully exported their own unique cultural forms.
Yeah, like anime.
Like anime and manga.
Huge global phenomena.
To a global audience.
It's not just about preserving the old ways.
Yeah. It's about innovating.
Within their own cultural framework.
Yes.
And then sharing that innovation with the world.
The example sentence in the source, I think, captures this beautifully. It says, Japan exemplifies how cultural innovation can coexist with tradition.
Exactly.
And this brings us back to that kind of central tension between the potential for cultural homogenization and this strong desire for cultural diversity. And cultural homogenization remains a significant worry for many.
It does.
This idea of local cultures becoming indistinguishable under the weight of global influence.
Right.
And often, as we've said, that influence is leaning towards
Western
cultural norm.
Western cultural norms, and the potential downsides are quite serious.
Yeah.
The source highlights the risk of minority languages disappearing, the loss of unique cultural rituals, things that are so deeply intertwined with a community's identity.
And sense of self.
And sense of self, yeah.
Absolutely. And the erosion of core community values. Those shared beliefs and norms that provide the kind of social glue for a society,
right?
That's another major concern. And the source introduces a crucial term here, hegemony.
Hegemony. So that's about dominance, isn't it?
It is.
Particularly when one group or entity exerts
significant power.
Yeah, significant power or control over others. And the example that's given is
the hegemony of English in global business has marginalized many regional languages. So that's a powerful way to illustrate how one dominant force can have these far-reaching consequences.
And so, thinking about online spaces, for example, could the widespread adoption of a single social media platform also exert a kind of cultural hegemony?
It's a fascinating question and a very relevant extension of the concept. The dominance of a particular platform can certainly shape communication norms, the types of content that gain visibility, even influence cultural trends globally. It's definitely something to think about.
Yeah, and this leads us to think about, okay, so what's the response to this concern about cultural loss? This idea of a cultural preservation. So what does that involve?
So the source defines cultural preservation as the act of maintaining and safeguarding cultural heritage.
Okay.
And it specifically points out that indigenous communities are often at the forefront of these vital efforts, working tirelessly to protect their unique identities and traditions.
And it's not simply about freezing a culture in time.
No.
It's about ensuring that those cultural traditions, languages, practices, continue to have a vibrant and relevant place
in the contemporary world. And the source provides some really inspiring real-world examples of this in action.
It does. Like India's intangible cultural heritage, which is recognized by UNESCO. And this includes incredible living traditions like yoga, classical dance forms, folk music. These are actively being supported and promoted to ensure their continuity.
And the Maori revival in New Zealand is another powerful example of cultural preservation and revitalization. The reintroduction of the Maori language and traditional tattoo practices into schools demonstrates this strong commitment to reclaiming and strengthening their cultural heritage.
That's for future generations.
For future generations, exactly.
And then we have the example of Arabic calligraphy in the Middle East, which is now included in educational curricula in some regions as a way to preserve both the artistic form and the broader linguistic tradition. And the example sentence in the source, I think, really sums this up nicely. It says, UNESCO's recognition of intangible heritage helps nations preserve their cultural narratives.
It really highlights that these cultural expressions are not just relics of the past. They're living stories, vital threads that continue to weave together a community's identity and understanding of itself.
Yeah, and as we're talking about this interaction between cultures, it's important to address a concept that often comes up and can be quite sensitive.
It can.
And that's cultural appropriation. So what's the key distinction here?
So the source defines cultural appropriation as the adoption of elements of one culture by members of another culture, often without permission.
Okay.
And the example given is the use of traditional garments as fashion trends. It's oft about taking elements out of their original meaningful context. Frequently without understanding or respecting their deeper significance.
And it prompts us to think, what's the difference between admiring and adopting versus understanding and appreciating?
Exactly. And it's crucial to differentiate this from cultural appreciation, which involves a deeper level of understanding and respect for another culture. Often involving seeking permission, giving credit where it's due, and engaging with the culture in a meaningful way.
It really encourages us as listeners to reflect on our own engagement with other cultures and ask ourselves, is it coming from a place of genuine respect or potential trivialization? Right now, shifting our focus a little, the source also touches on some really interesting language aspects connected to this topic, and starting with idioms and phrasal verbs. Let's consider this phrase, lose touch with. What does that communicate?
So Lose touch with means to become less aware of or less connected to something.
Okay.
And the example provided is some young people are losing touch with their roots.
Right.
Highlighting that potential disconnect from their cultural heritage as global influences become more prominent in their lives.
Right. And then we have this phrasal verb, pass down. What's the significance of that?
So pass down refers to the act of giving traditions, knowledge, or skills to younger generations.
Okay.
And the example given is quite evocative. Our elders pass down stories through oral traditions. So it emphasizes that crucial role of intergenerational transfer. Yeah.
And maintaining cultural continuity.
And finally, we have this phrasal verb, fade away. And that carries a sense of gradual disappearance.
It does.
Fade away means to gradually disappear or become less noticeable.
Right.
And the example, many rituals are fading away due to modernization, speaks directly to that very real concern about the loss of cultural practices in the face of rapid societal change.
Yeah, the source also offers some valuable vocabulary expansion, just looking at synonyms and how these words are used. And let's start with the verb erode.
Okay, so erode means to gradually diminish or undermine something.
Okay.
And the example provided is Western influence has eroded traditional family values.
Right.
Again, illustrating a potential negative consequence of globalization on established cultural norms.
And word we've used quite a bit throughout this deep dive, preserve. So what are some other ways to think about that word?
So the synonyms offered are safeguard, protect, maintain. And the example is really telling, efforts must be made to preserve endangered languages, emphasizing the active role that's often necessary in cultural preservation.
Lastly, the noun heritage.
Right. Heritage can also be understood as legacy, tradition, inheritance.
Right.
And the example, cultural heritage as a source of national pride, underscores the important role that shared culture plays in fostering a sense of collective identity and belonging.
Now, the source also includes some insights from conversation practices related to this topic, which brings in some really practical dimensions.
It does.
And it mentions how the prevalence of traditional clothing is changing in many places due to globalization and the convenience of mass-produced fashion.
Right.
Which kind of links back to what we were talking about earlier with the influence of global media.
Yeah, and it highlights this ongoing discussion about, is globalization's impact primarily one of cultural loss? Or does it also create new opportunities for cultures to share their unique expressions and connect with a broader global audience?
Right. It's a complex picture.
It is a complex picture with different perspectives.
And importantly, it emphasizes this need to raise awareness. There's that phrasal verb in action again.
Yeah.
And to actively involve young people in cultural preservation projects. It even uses the terms cultural identity, that deep sense of belonging to a particular culture.
Right.
And artisan, recognizing those skilled craftspeople who often hold vital traditional knowledge.
Yeah.
So it all points to the importance of active engagement and participation in navigating these changes.
Absolutely. And it brings us back to a key concluding thought from the source, which is the importance of finding a balance. The future of traditional cultures, it suggests, really depends on our ability to honor and learn from the past, while also actively and thoughtfully engaging with the future.
And it makes this point that cultural preservation isn't something that will just automatically happen.
Right.
It requires intentional effort.
Yeah.
Whether that's through educational initiatives, thoughtful media representation, or even, supportive government policies. And it ends on this really optimistic and powerful statement, suggesting that globalization doesn't have to be the enemy of tradition. It can be its stage. I love that. It's such a good way to kind of reframe the relationship, suggesting that globalized world can actually provide platforms for traditional cultures.
Yeah.
To showcase their resilience.
And unique beauty.
And unique beauty to a wider audience.
Yeah.
It's a fantastic perspective to end on.
Yeah.
So as we bring this deep dive to a close, the central takeaway for you, the listener, is this intricate and ever-evolving relationship between globalization and traditional cultures. We've explored both the very real challenges posed by homogenization and cultural loss, but also the significant potential for innovation, adaptation, and proactive preservation in an increasingly interconnected world.
And that leads us to a final thought-provoking question for you to consider.
Yeah.
Building on this idea of globalization as a stage.
Okay.
Reflecting on all the diverse examples we've discussed, from Japan's successful balancing act to the inspiring cultural preservation efforts in India and New Zealand, what do you believe is the most effective way for a traditional culture to not just survive, but truly thrive in an increasingly globalized world?
Right.
Is it primarily through actively preserving existing traditions in their original form, through adapting and innovating within a cultural context, or perhaps through a thoughtful combination of both approaches? What are the potential long-term consequences of these different strategies, and what role can individuals play in shaping this future?
Vital questions for us all to really consider. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive.
We hope this exploration has given you some valuable insights to ponder.
Join us next time as we delve into, well, let's just say we'll be uncovering some fascinating dynamics within the realm of behavioral economics.
Sounds intriguing.
Until then, keep thinking deeply.
About the world around you.
Okay, so this week, you guys really outdid yourselves with the research material.
Yeah. It's quite a stack.
It is. It's a big one, and it's all centered around this topic of generational differences, which is something that we all, see and feel every single day, right? I mean, just think about like the world that your grandparents navigated,
right?
And you send in some really interesting historical pieces. It's just light years away from the world that we live in now, and it really shapes not just our memories, but our core beliefs about the world.
Absolutely.
So our mission today is to dive into these generational divides.
Okay.
Because, understanding them, especially in light of all the stuff that you've been sending in about, the challenges that you're facing at work and the opportunities that are out there, it's not just an academic exercise.
Right.
It's really about bridging these gaps in understanding and finding better ways to connect.
I think you're right.
Okay.
So it's, those big social and political and technological changes, earthquakes that each generation goes through, they really do leave a mark. And they shape how we see the world. And,
for sure.
And as we go through all this research that you sent us, we can really see how those shared experiences form value systems, like whole ways of looking at things. And so when you recognize these really foundational differences, it gives you this amazing lens to look through, to try to understand,
understand other people.
Motivations, perspectives of the people around you.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's so important for all of the stuff that you're sending into us. So,
Okay.
So let's unpack this using the framework of 4 key generations that kept popping up in all your research. First, the baby boomers.
All right.
Roughly from 1946 to 1964. And the common thread that I saw in all the articles that you sent about baby boomers was this sense of loyalty.
Okay.
A real sense of discipline and a deep-seated belief in hard work.
Yeah, makes sense.
Then we have Generation X.
Okay.
Born approximately between 1965 and 1980. And your notes really emphasize their independence, their skepticism, and a commitment to work-life balance, which is interesting, right?
Yeah, very much so.
Following them, we have the millennials.
Okay.
Born from 1981 to 1996. Now, the articles you send about millennials really highlighted a few things. Their tech savviness.
Okay.
They're very tech savvy. A strong drive for purpose and a preference for flexibility. And finally, Generation Z. Born between 1997 and 2012.
Okay.
Now, all of the social media analysis that you sent in pointed to this generation as being true digital natives. Deeply engaged with social issues and placing a really high value on diversity and inclusivity.
For sure.
So today we're going to explore how the defining life events of each of these groups have molded their beliefs. And we also want to make sure that we're all on the same page when we talk about these differences. So we're going to touch on some key vocabulary.
Good idea.
That seemed really central to a lot of the discussions you've been sending in.
Absolutely. And what I was going to say is that sometimes the same word can have a really different meaning.
Yes.
Depending on, who's saying it and who they are, what generation they're from.
Yeah, for sure.
Because we all have these different backgrounds, so
yes, exactly.
It's important to be on the same page.
Absolutely. All right, so speaking of language,
yeah,
let's nail down some of that crucial vocabulary that appears so frequently in your materials. First up, generational gap.
Okay.
Which I think is pretty intuitive.
Yeah.
It's just the difference in attitudes or behavior between generations. And you mentioned some friction in your team's communication styles.
Right.
And this gap, like when you have a boomer colleague who prefers email versus a Gen Z colleague who relies on, instant messaging.
Yeah.
That can be a prime example.
Yeah, absolutely. It can be a real clash.
For sure.
And, underpinning all of those attitudes is something called a value system.
Okay.
And that's basically, a set of ethical values that each generation tends to kind of develop.
Right.
And it happens in response to, the world. They grow up in the big shifts they see in society.
Right.
So, for example, you highlighted some stuff in your notes about economic anxiety, and I bet that really contributed to,
so the
Generation X's value system.
Totally. Okay.
Yeah.
So then we have conventional,
right,
referring to what's traditionally done or believed. And, you touched on this in your notes about family structures.
Yeah.
And it's often said that baby boomers, they had more conventional views on family roles compared to the more diverse perspectives that we see today.
Yeah, I think that's true.
Yeah. And then in contrast to conventional, you have disruptive, describing something that's causing radical change. And, the shift to remote work.
Oh, yeah.
Which millennials really championed.
For sure.
And that your company is now grappling with. That could be seen as a disruptive force, shaking up those traditional workplace norms.
Yeah. I mean, it's really changed things, hasn't it?
It really has. Okay, now this one's a little bit tricky.
Okay.
Entitlement. Right. We saw this word in some of the older articles that you shared that were criticizing younger workers. And sometimes it refers to this belief in inherent privilege.
Yeah.
And it's crucial to remember.
Yeah.
And your HR documents even hinted at this.
Yeah.
That these perceptions often stem from differing expectations about career progression and reward.
It's about what people think they deserve and what they should get for for their work and their effort.
Totally. Okay, shifting our focus a bit, we have social consciousness, which is an awareness of social issues, and the level of engagement that you documented in your analysis of Gen Z's online activity really underscores their strong social consciousness and their drive to advocate for change.
They're not afraid to speak up.
They're not, no.
About the things they believe in.
Exactly.
Oh.
Okay, moving on to workplace dynamics.
All right.
We have hierarchical, which describes an arrangement by rank. And you noted in your observations of older company structures that baby boomers, having often thrived in these environments, might be more comfortable with traditional hierarchical workplaces.
Sure, they're used to it.
It's familiar. Exactly.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, millennials, as some of your internal surveys indicated, often express a preference for a more egalitarian structure.
Right.
One that's based on equality rather than strict rank.
They want things to be more flat.
Exactly. Yeah.
Less about who's the boss and more about,
collaboration.
Yeah, collaboration, teamwork.
Okay, so then there's adaptability.
Okay.
The ability to adjust to new conditions. And Generation X, having navigated that really tricky shift from analog to digital.
Huge shift.
A huge shift, which you detailed in one of your technology history pieces.
Yeah.
They often demonstrate remarkable adaptability.
Yeah, they're good at rolling with the punches.
They are.
Right.
And they're really that bridge between two very different eras.
Yeah, they're in-betweeners.
They are.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, and finally, skepticism.
All right.
A doubt about the truth of something and the political climate during Gen X's formative years, which you outlined in your news article archive, likely contributed to their skepticism towards institutions and authority.
Yeah, they've seen a lot.
They have so much change.
Yeah.
Okay. So with that vocabulary as our foundation,
right,
let's dig into how those major life events that you researched have shaped the core beliefs of each generation.
Right.
So let's start with the baby boomers.
Okay.
Their early lives were marked by, post-World War II optimism, civil rights movement, and the rise of suburbia.
Right.
All of which you highlighted, in your timelines and your historical research.
Yeah.
So what key beliefs took root in that environment?
Well, that post-war era, it really fostered a strong belief in progress.
Yeah.
And, this idea of the American dream.
Okay.
Like that if you work hard, play by the rules, you're going to have a better life.
Yeah.
And the civil rights movement, it was a time of huge struggle, obviously.
Of course. Yeah.
But it also showed that,
what's possible?
Yeah, what's possible. Yeah. Positive change.
Right. Through collective action within, existing systems.
Yeah.
And so this combined with, the growth of these big stable companies.
Right.
It led to this belief in the company man ideal.
Okay.
Where loyalty and long-term employment were valued.
Yeah.
And they were often rewarded with security.
Right.
Which is a huge contrast to what Generation X went through.
Yeah.
Later, because they faced a much more fluid career landscape.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
That's really interesting.
It is.
And when it comes to technology for boomers, it's important to remember that they adapted to it.
Right.
They didn't grow up with personal computers or the internet.
Right.
As just like constants in their lives.
Right. They saw it evolve.
Yeah.
They witnessed the evolution.
Yeah, and they learned to use it, but it wasn't, like part of their childhood or, their teenage years.
Yeah.
Really?
Okay, so let's turn to Generation X.
Okay.
Now their formative years were quite different.
Yeah, they were.
Marked by economic recessions,
right,
the rise of personal computing, and the fall of the Berlin Wall.
Yeah. Wow. That's a lot.
It's a lot. How did those events shape their outlook?
Okay, so the economic instability of the 70s and 80s, with things like stagflation and, companies restructuring.
Right.
It really bred this strong sense of self-reliance and a distrust of big institutions, like corporations, governments, they learned not to trust these big entities.
Interesting.
And then you have the fall of the Berlin Wall,
right,
which kind of fostered this sense of global interconnectedness. Yeah. But then at the same time, the economy was tough.
Yeah.
And so it emphasized individual responsibility and a more pragmatic outlook. Okay. And they were also the first generation to really widely adopt PCs.
Right.
Personal computers, but they still remember a world
without them.
Without computers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they're bridging that gap between the analog and the digital.
Yeah.
And I think that really contributed to their adaptability.
For sure. And that economic uncertainty that you mentioned probably fueled their strong value of work-life balance.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Because seeing potential instability in long-term employment probably made them think, you know what? I need to have a fulfilling life outside of work.
Yeah, for sure.
If things are going to be unstable here, I need to make sure that things are good over here.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, so then we have the millennials.
Okay.
Coming of age with the explosion of the internet.
Yeah.
The tragedy of global terrorism and the financial crisis of 2008.
Yeah.
It's a really intense set of formative experiences.
It is a lot to deal with.
Yeah, how did that mold their beliefs?
Well, the rise of the internet, it created this hyper-connected world. Yeah. So much information. And it really fostered a sense of global citizenship.
Being aware of the whole world.
Right.
But then you have 9/11 and the financial crisis in 2008.
Right.
And that really eroded their trust.
Yeah.
In systems, established systems.
Right.
And this idea that the economy would always be stable.
Yeah.
They saw that wasn't necessarily true.
Right. And they experienced economic hardship.
Yeah.
Early in their careers.
Yeah, for sure.
Coupled with the rise of social media.
Right.
That was showcasing, all these different career paths. And a lot of them were very purpose-driven.
Yeah.
And it really led them to prioritize meaning and impact over, purely financial gain.
Right.
And they saw the limitations of,
the traditional.
That traditional corporate ladder.
Yeah.
And they were more inclined towards
passion projects, side hustles.
Yeah.
Finding more fulfillment in their work.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And of course, they are digital pioneer.
Yeah.
The first generation to grow up with the internet as like
it's always this
ever-present force.
Yeah, it's like the air they breathe.
It really is, yeah. And that makes perfect sense when you consider that context, the emphasis on purpose and flexibility.
Yeah.
It really resonates with that history.
It does.
Okay, so now let's consider Generation Z.
Oh.
They've grown up in a world grappling with climate change, saturated by social media, and with a much greater awareness of mental health issues.
For sure.
So how has that shaped their worldview?
Well, growing up with climate change, this, really serious threat has instilled a real sense of urgency and a commitment to sustainability.
Right.
They want to protect the planet.
Yeah.
And then social media, it's made them so aware of social issues and injustices happening all over the world.
All the time.
All the time.
Yeah.
And so they have this strong drive for inclusivity and diversity and then mental health. It's a big priority for them.
Yes.
Both personally and at work.
Yeah, for sure.
And for Gen Z, activism isn't just something they read about.
Right.
It's personal.
Yeah.
It's part of their lives.
It's integrated.
Yeah.
Yeah. And technologically, they are truly digital natives.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, they don't even recall a time without smartphones and instant access to information.
It's just always been there.
It's just their baseline reality.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's fascinating, isn't it?
It is.
How these different landscapes
Yeah.
create these, totally different lenses through which each generation views the world.
It's like they're wearing different glasses.
Exactly.
Looking at the same thing.
Yeah. So let's zoom in on how these core beliefs translate into the workplace.
Right.
Specifically looking at work values.
Got it.
Okay. We have a really interesting snapshot here.
Okay.
When it comes to career loyalty. Right? Baby boomers tend to show high loyalty.
Okay.
Followed by Gen X with a moderate level, millennials and Gen Z.
Yeah.
On the other hand, generally exhibit lower career loyalty.
Interesting.
So what do you think explains this shift?
Well, I think it reflects how the economy has changed.
Right.
And how this idea of, working for one company for your whole life.
Right.
It's not really a thing anymore.
It's not as common.
Yeah, it's not as common.
Yeah.
So boomers, they often expected to build a whole career within one organization.
Right.
Whereas later generations, they've seen companies restructure.
Yeah.
They've seen a more dynamic job market.
Right.
And so they prioritize their own growth and their own fulfillment.
Yeah.
Over staying in one role for decades.
Right.
If it doesn't fit them anymore.
Yeah, they're not afraid to move on.
Exactly.
And work-life balance.
Okay.
That seems to have undergone a real transformation across generations.
Yeah, a huge one.
A huge one.
Yeah.
Boomers often placed a lower emphasis on it.
Right.
While Gen X millennials, and particularly Gen Z, place a high or a very high value on it.
Yeah, they do.
So why do you think that is?
Well, again, I think it goes back to their experiences.
Yeah.
Next, they faced potential job insecurity, so they wanted to have those boundaries between work and life millennials. They encountered burnout.
Yeah.
And they were searching for more purpose.
Right.
So they also prioritized balance.
Yeah.
And Gen Z, they grew up with this, awareness of mental health and well-being.
Yes.
And so for them, work-life balance, it's not just a perk. It's essential.
A requirement.
It's a requirement for a good career.
Okay, so attitude towards technology.
Right.
Another really stark differentiator.
Yeah.
Boomers adapted. Gen X adopted.
Yeah.
Millennials innovated.
Right.
And Gen Z are natives.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just a part of their lives.
Like their arm.
It is.
Yeah.
It's an extension of them.
It is.
And what about their views on authority?
Okay.
Your leadership studies indicated that boomers tend to be respectful. Gen X more skeptical.
Right.
Millennials more casual.
Yeah.
And Gen Z can be quite challenging of traditional hierarchical structures.
For sure.
So what's going on there?
Well, I think it reflects these broader changes in society, in terms of trust and power dynamics.
Yeah.
Boomers grew up in a very hierarchical world.
Yeah.
And they generally respected authority.
Right.
Gen X, they saw things differently.
Yeah.
They were more skeptical millennials in a more connected world. They were more informal.
Okay.
And Gen Z They're empowered by information. They want equality.
Yeah.
They're more likely to challenge authority if it doesn't match their values.
Yeah, if it doesn't make sense to them.
Yeah, exactly.
They're going to question it.
They'll push back.
Yeah. Okay, finally, the role of purpose in work. Now, your research on employee motivation highlighted that for boomers, it was often secondary. For Gen X, maybe optional. But for millennials, and especially Gen Z, having a sense of purpose is really important.
Yeah, it's crucial.
Even essential.
It is.
So what do you think is driving that?
Well, this generation, they really care about making a difference. You know, they want their jobs to mean something, whether it's, you know, social change, environmental sustainability, or just, you know, something that aligns with their values.
Right, it has to feel right.
Yeah, it has to feel right.
Yeah.
And this is a big shift from previous generations who, you know, maybe focus more on money.
Right.
Or climbing the ladder.
Okay, so this has been incredibly insightful.
Well, thank you.
Especially when we consider all of the specific examples and the data points that you've brought to the table. So now for you, our listener, take a moment to think about this.
Yeah.
Which generation's perspective really resonates with you and why?
Good question.
Think about your own upbringing, the events you've lived through.
Right.
How have those shaped your own views on work, on technology, on the big issues that are facing our world?
That's a big one.
It's a big one.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating to consider how our own histories kind of intersect with these broader generational trends.
Yeah. It all ties together.
It does.
Doesn't it?
Yeah, okay. So to bring it all together, we've done a deep dive into the values and the beliefs across these 4 generations. Baby boomers, Gen X, millennials, and Gen Z.
Right.
And it's clear that these differences aren't random.
No, they're not.
They're rooted in the different contexts that each generation experienced.
The times they lived in shaped them.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And recognizing these different lenses through which different generations view the world
so important
is really crucial
for
better communication, stronger collaboration, and ultimately a more empathetic and understanding society.
Yeah, it's the goal.
So here's a final thought.
Okay.
Given these generational values, and especially with millennials and Gen Z, you know, really having an increasing influence on our world.
Yeah, they're coming up.
How do you think the future of work and society will be shaped?
Ooh, that's a good question.
What kind of impact will the values of baby boomers and Gen X continue to have as these younger generations step into leadership roles?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see.
It really is. It's a dynamic interplay.
It is.
And the story's still unfolding.
It is, for sure.
So thanks for taking this deep dive with us.
Yeah, this was fun.
It was great.